glad to talk to you all, and happy to take questions. And I'm really excited to be here and spend some time with all of you. Yeah. So I'm here really to share with you some of what we're doing in the broader context of mobility. We have an exciting set of challenges that we've announced in our app, software application, app development challenges, and then some of them also include the development of accessories. And really all focused on improving our understanding of what the needs would be for us in terms of providing personal mobility services, mostly in the urban context, but also not forgetting the fact that we have transportation and personal mobility demands in rural areas, and making sure that we can provide services in the rural areas with uncompromised reach, if you will. So I'm really happy to take questions along these directions. So we could start when you're ready.
So one of the something that comes to my mind, Prasad, first thing is, why limit these challenges to geographies? The golden hour, for example, is as critical in any other situation. Delhi may have a traffic block which will not allow an ambulance to move, but another city may not have an ambulance available for the next hour.
Right. I think it's a good point. The nature of these challenges, if we sort of look a little closer, is that it attracts developers from anywhere in the planet, but forces them to draw the attention to a certain geographical context. And the smart folks, and they're all smart folks out there, will create applications, will not start from scratch when they do that, but build on a large body of knowledge they've already accumulated, and then make it fit a certain context, but be immediately ready to map it to a completely different geographical location and throw in the local context needed to make it relevant there. So in a very general sense, these are all completely applicable in any city, and we don't limit the developers to be only from a certain region. And that's because of the nature of these platforms, these internet-enabled platforms that allow you to go reach any developer anywhere on the planet. But to solve a problem, it always helps to have a specific case, and then if you're smart enough, you'll be able to generalize that. So there's a good reason why Albert Einstein created the specific theory of relativity, and all his papers are on that before he went to the general theory. But if you can actually do that for a specific location, it helps prove your example, and the world is yours.
So my question comes from another point of view, is that in the special jury prize, for example, you say the stakeholders in Delhi. Are you involving a government agency or a local agency as a stakeholder when evaluating it at a later date? Is that something you want to speak about, or it's just to isolate geographies?
Yeah. So let me sort of, in all these contests, and as we design for the future of mobility, there are sort of, I'd say, three classes of stakeholders. One is the individual consumer, the commuter, the sort of person who pays money to buy this product, to buy the service. And if it's not right for them, we're wasting our time, because if they don't consume it, we don't get any value from the beginning, if you will. The second and equally important customer in this case is not the individual consumer, but it's the city as the customer, or the municipality as the customer, or the local region or the regional authority as a customer. And so if you're giving great benefit to the consumer, but at the expense of, in some sense, making it more costly for the municipality, you will have either policy, or you'll have sort of disincentives created. That could be taxation and other things that prevent you from offering that service. So that will also be a defeated purpose. So we have to really aim at solving the problem of the customer, the municipality as the customer, if you will. The third group is, of course, the firm itself, in this case, afford working with its ecosystem. So it has to be profitable, sustainable, viable for the ecosystem, because this is not something that we're doing for charity. We're doing so we can have a thriving, profitable ecosystem, which then drives other set of capabilities and solutions, right? So it's all three: the consumer as a customer, the city as a customer, or municipality as a customer, and then of course the firm and the ecosystem of the firms as customers.
Okay.
So my question is about the Health initiative. So Health has been experimented in the past, and like there's had some amount of fair amount of success, but not very successful on the grand scheme of things. So how do you think Ford is going to differentiate with this whole Health initiative, which you're talking about as a part of this mobility plan?
Oh, the Health one is sort of a combination of being able to both offer health-related services through the accessibility to information and information services in the context of healthcare. At the same time, providing the physical modality, in this case, perhaps a vehicle that actually transports either goods and services needed for healthcare, or the individual caregivers themselves, the paramedics themselves, or the patients. So it's really coming together of both those. And what we've found is that doing one in the absence of the other doesn't really help. In often cases, we found that mHealth has been purely focused on a mobile application that allows a certain amount of information to be exchanged via phone. But at the end of the day, you can augment and supplement that with the delivery of goods and services, bring expertise, the very physical things. And so we're hoping to bring both those together through this. Not that it hasn't been tried before, but I think with the maturity of technologies, there's a new way to connect those old dots and then introduce new capabilities in the bargain, and again create a solution that's viable for the end user, consumer, for the municipality or the service provider, that is dependent on funds from public sources, and then for all the ecosystem elements that are dependent.
So why particularly Tamil Nadu? Just because you have the Ford factory here in Chennai, so is that the reason you have an existing arrangement with some of the local bodies here, or something of that sort?
We started that project a couple of years ago. In that case, we've chosen that region because we had the investment in the Ford factory there. But again, what's really important to bear in mind is the underlying principles and what we learn are really transportable to anywhere on the planet. We again need a specific location to get started to solve problems, but we're not doing this to have only a local applicability, and therefore this will be applicable anywhere else. For sure.
So one of the things that I see is, when you say for the challenge, you talk about solution must include, there's a lot of emphasis on a web app and a desktop app still.
Yeah.
Why is that? They're all right. It's a lot of repetitive work. Isn't that a lot of repetitive work as a participant to do a web app, as well as do a desktop app, as well as do a software running on a hardware, as well as do a wearable software? Isn't that too much?
I think what we
too many directions to start with.
Yeah, so I think if it's all of those and it has to work in all those, that becomes a real big demand. But what we're really looking for is a clear ability to work on one of those, and the ability to also be shown to work on others, or at least steps to be able to work on others. Just because there's a whole back-end side to any application. The reality is almost any application that you consume, let's say on your favorite smart device, has a back-end partner to it. So anyone creating a web application, a mobile application knows this. It's not a duplication of effort. You have something in the
No, I was not saying from the mobile point of view. I was saying, you're asking for a desktop app as well as a web app.
Okay. I think the whole point is, if you're doing this, if you're architecting this in a sort of a clever way, and most people do that, it wouldn't be 100% sort of duplication of effort. Or I should say, it would be really a small extension to get it to work on the others. And we're not looking for 100% performance capability on all the others. We just want to show that it can also be used on others, because I think that's where the real value comes. So I think it's to that extent that we wanted to work on others. It should work well on one. It should also be able to work on in the other contexts. And as long as you can show that you have the context that can be brought into effect for it to work on a sort of as a general web application or as a general desktop application, that really suffices.
So does that mean that you're looking at bringing out some kind of services out of this whole challenge, like services which can be kind of sold in the market by the developers later, rather than standalone apps, which like regarding health as well as like the ambulance as well as the monsoon stuff as well? So do you see a value as this whole challenge creates some services coming out in the ecosystem, like consumable service is being built?
Right. So we're not. Yeah, at this point we're in a pretty early stage, so we don't expect a direct commercialization coming from us. On the other hand, if the individual entrepreneur wants to take it off to a commercial application, they're completely liberty to do so. We would of course love to see how we could partner with them and look at even a commercial application down the road. But this is really meant to be a way to create an accelerated effect for the individual developer and for their road to market, if you will.
So, adding to what Varun was saying on the mHealth, if you actually read through the challenge on mHealth, the challenge is not very clear in terms of what you wanted to achieve. You know, if you look at the Golden Hour challenge or the Monsoon app challenge, it seems pretty much clear in terms of what you want to achieve. But the mHealth thing, you know, you say you want to reach out to the people who are disconnected, but doesn't really talk about what you want to do, right? Do you want to capture if the person in the car is healthy, or use this for an ambulance service? How do you really want to put this into use?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think at this point we didn't want to restrict exactly what it could do because it's so powerful as a general platform. On the other hand, there is a trade-off. When you don't do that, it looks like it's not focused. From our perspective, this is really trying to provide care in the rural context that doesn't get compromised just because you are out in the rural context. And so oftentimes one element of that rural care has to do with appropriate and timely delivery of information about a specific patient's ailment or care without the expert physically being in that location, kind of luxury that you have in an urban context. And so fundamentally we're looking at applications that will enable services without compromise in the rural context. And so it could be, so this is not about someone who's in the vehicle and whose healthcare needs to be attended to. This is really about someone who's out in the rural area, who tends to live there and is looking for care and providing the care that sort of that person would expect if they were in a rural area, in an urban area. So it's about.
No, but how does it plug into the Ford ecosystem? I'm sorry, where I'm getting disconnected. So let's look at the Golden Hour challenge. Okay, I understand. And recently in the Ford Fiesta Drive, you know, there was a discussion on in case the fuel pump cuts out or if the airbags deflate, the car would automatically place a call using your cell phone, which A, essentially should be connected, and B, should be in a service area to make a call to a primary center or a national emergency to say, hey, there is an accident occurred in this location, right? Now, yes, you can detect traffic flows, you can detect how fast the car was and send out all that critical information to do a Golden Hour. Similarly, you could do traffic mapping, and if wipers were they working at full speed, so you could do the monsoon app. I still don't understand what the mHealth thing is about. It's very loosely.
Right. So I think, let me give you some, you know, it's more or less by design that it's somewhat loose, but one way to look at it is that future provisioning of emergency services through ambulances that's built on products that Ford built, for example, right? Could be coupled to knowledge about the individual patient or the context. And by the way, a lot of this that we do, we don't think is going to be necessarily exclusive to Ford. Anyone who wants to use this.
Sure, I understand that. Sure, I understand that. My question primarily is that it's very loosely worded. There's no specific ask of this challenge.
Yeah, but I'll go back and take a look at that. Good feedback. We certainly want to ensure that we get a wide enough audience of developers. And then from that, we can sort of look at how we might group them into categories that then make sense for specific applications. I think, but we will certainly go back and take a look at that and see what that means, the broad statement of the lack of something that's specific. But I think by design, we did not want to get committed to one or the other. We thought it was such a rich platform in terms of getting a wide set of developers to work on that. And in general, we've found that sometimes there's a trade-off there. Sometimes we get some good results having very specific, focused objectives. In another case, we get some very interesting application suggestions. Even we have it broad. We've done a bit of both. We had a personalized fuel efficiency contest some months ago that was focused on a fuel efficiency problem. We had a how do you reduce congestion in London problem. We thought it was so broad. Again, we got a lot of questions of can you keep a little more specific. But we got some interesting categories of applications through that. So I think both have paid off, and so we're looking at a good turnout for this too. Thank you.
Sure. So Prasad, you come from a research background, and you've got a number of papers with you that you worked on. You've been at the helm of innovation. So why is this limited to people to implement and not to papers that people could resolve a challenge? Why is this limited to a hardcore implementation and not a call for papers? Maybe it wouldn't have a prize there, right? Why isn't there a call for papers in terms of how you work?
I think that's happening. Yes, good question. So a lot of that is happening in parallel. So we have professional bodies, whether it's the ACM, Association for Computing Machinery, or the IEEE, which is an Electrical and Electronics Engineering Society, or the SAE International, which deals with all kinds of mobility and related sort of interests, where we have papers and we publish papers and we review papers. So this doesn't preclude that. They both happen. And I'm fairly active in some of those sort of societies and groups too. We have three separate.
Sure, I understand that, but why is this a hardcore implementation call? Because somebody who may have a great idea may not be a good implementer.
Right. So this is interesting. Over the last maybe 5 years, there's been a growth in these crowdsourcing platforms, if you will, where you actually source ideas, you source solutions, and you actually source the actual business model itself and figure out how to take it to market. And so with the availability of these platforms, we've now reached a conclusion that this too qualifies really well as a crowdsourcing opportunity, this being the kinds of questions we're asking under mobility. And we do get, every once in a while, you will actually get an application, an idea, a person with a good set of ideas who says, well, I've got the ideas, I'm going to reach out to somebody who really has the development skills. And those are really very interesting submissions that we get to. So we get someone who's got the idea, who says, we are part of a broader team of 4 people submitting this. The idea came from so-and-so, the implementation happened here, and here are some sort of subject matter skills. And so the 4 of them go on to a little YouTube clip and say how they came together. And they might actually be in different parts of the world coming together to sort of create a holistic solution. So one doesn't preclude the other at all. We certainly entertain, and we have in the past and continue to do so with people who have the ideas but not the wherewithal to go create the application. But what we don't want are just ideas, because we get plenty of those. We have a number of ways, a number of channels through which we get ideas, and we welcome those. But in this particular context, we actually want to go one step beyond the ideas phase to be able to get to some actual solutions, not as products yet, but really conceptual. to be able to take it to the next stage of evaluation.
Sure. So, sorry, just another question that comes to my mind when I'm looking at how Ford is opening up to India, but you still restrict your in-dash consoles to a dot matrix passive display and have not gone to any modern displays, even though the whole focus of Ford Connect is very large. I know that that's a price impact, and India is a very price-sensitive market. But do you not foresee cars being sold 2014, 2015 getting limited by 2016 when this is the thing to do?
Yeah, I think one really has to pay very careful attention to what consumers are demanding and experiencing. Competition today is not necessarily looking for another car manufacturer and seeing what they do, but perhaps what's in the hands of people and what they're bringing in. They're bringing amazing flat screen devices that do a lot of great things for individual lives, whether it's entertainment or information. But I think it's one thing to really bear in mind. The best of the flat screen devices we have, whether it's a tablet or whether it's a smartphone, is an amazing piece of product design, but designed for 0 kilometers an hour. And imagine this flat screen full of application icons on it. And also imagine now that you have wheels placed beneath that flat screen, your tablet or your smartphone now racing along at 100 kilometers an hour. For that to be viable and for it to stay functional, the number of applications you see there will soon disappear to maybe 1 or 2 that you can really use safely in a car. So designing a car experience begins with, it has to end with safety in mind. I'm not saying that's a good excuse for obsolescence and not being able to upgrade your hardware. But on the other hand, it does take a lot of time to build a device that's useful at 100 kilometers an hour and usable at 100 kilometers an hour. And
sure, but so this was primarily because, so before you came in, there was a conversation which was on how Ford, and when I speak about Ford specifically in India, is very progressive in its outlook to bringing technology to the consumer. And I was sharing this with your team offline that, 2 years back when Ford started talking about sync in the cars and connectivity, half the car manufacturers would not even put Bluetooth on the car and say, hey, you know what, it raises the cost. But aren't you getting entrapped into what you want to build in the future with the current cars today? You are moving away from the dot matrix displays globally, right? So right. One is obviously the cost perception of the car, and now we look at things. The second is the silliest implementation of navigation in an Indian car by using MapMyIndia's hardware. When you have great platforms with yourself.
Well, I lost the audio for some reason.
So what I was saying was, don't you think this is this is going to get into trouble for Ford itself, that any car that I think of buying today or 2015 may just not have the latest technology in 2016. There's not a mobile phone I change every year, right?
Right. No, I think dealing with obsolescence is always a challenge. There's sort of this conflict between what is good to optimize the manufacturer's cost of commodities and components and the value-added elements they put in versus being able to make sure that you can replace a piece of hardware that's been part of the product assumptions with the latest and greatest hardware that might come a year or two from now. So I think we're sort of in this transition where we've come to terms now with being able to upgrade software and upgrade the connectivity of the latest device to your vehicle to where we think we need to be with respect to even replacing elements of hardware. I don't think we're there yet, but we're looking at this change happening from a world where you get software upgrades in your phone and you're so used to that, you expect that in your car now, to a world where you get hardware upgrades in your car that you didn't really think was possible with cars, but now we have to sort of look at a world where we design cars with those hardware upgrades. And so I think we're in that transition. Not there yet, but certainly that's sort of where our thinking is.
Okay. Good. The longer debate. Can I ask you to do something for me, please? Since you said you work closely with the ACM team, can you please ask them to start taking online payments and stop this demand draft business for renewal of ACM every year.
Oh, they do
Maybe
that?
they'll listen.
I make my
They
payments
don't.
online. Get away with that.
No, they don't. The renewal every year is a bit of a hassle, right?
I'll
So
make some.
demand draft, man. They don't listen to me. They listen to you.
Yes. That's interesting. I didn't realize. Okay.
No, that's my biggest problem with bodies like ACM and everything. That they've been thinking so much inside the box that what happens is good. It's
That's ACM.
sometimes we need to step out and maybe just do a call for papers. And I know some brilliant kids around the country who just want to submit papers to what you're asking for today. I mean, not A, have the focus, B, even want to get into with the developer. They're not.
Yeah, no, I'd like to follow up because it was 2009 maybe. I was the co-chair of the IEEE ICVES, International Conference on Vehicle Electronics and Safety in Pune.
Okay.
And we had a really good experience. In fact, a couple of students who won the first place got placed at some of the best universities in the US for grad school, which is not to say that that's the best way out, but best way forward. But nevertheless, that came out of, I think, in part helped by the fact that they presented at this workshop and won the first place there. And this was a conference, open call to papers, peer reviewed. So I think there's certainly a room and and sort of a place for that kind of activity, which we should certainly continue to foster. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. Thank you, Prasad.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, so one more question. So we're talking about.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about mobility. So, especially in the Indian context, when do we see? I think we spoke about it at Computex as well. Just bringing this up again. So, in-car connectivity, like to mobile networks. So that's something which is bare necessity right now, especially when you have like apps like these, which are very data reliant. You can't just rely on the phone for some applications like life critical applications like mHealth or even an ambulance or trauma care or whatever. So you need a fallback rather even have a MiFi in a car. So I think users would be willing to invest in something like that as an additional cost. So what's your thoughts on the entire kind of industry trend about data in the car?
So is the question about what's the industry trend?
Yep, and generally your understanding at Ford and when you would see this going mainstream.
I think this really has to deal with sort of a specific example in the case of cars of a much broader case of machine-to-machine connectivity, right? So having data stream out of machines and get aggregated and add value. In the case of cars, we have that form of. That's what you mean? Is that what you had in mind?
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at cars today in sort of the broader Ford ecosystem, we offer this kind of embedded connectivity to our electric vehicles, where the state of the vehicle itself changes with time. So if you leave your electric vehicle parked and you go away for a few hours or overnight, you see the state of charge could go down, and so it makes sense to be connected to your vehicle and be able to respond to it. And so I think, as you pointed out, for certain kinds of critical services or the state of the vehicle itself changes, it makes sense to have this connectivity that's independent of the kind of device you bring in. And again, I think it's those kinds of applications and those kinds of market demands that will force those decisions. At the end of the day, of course, we have to be very, very sensitive to the cost. Both the initial cost of putting something that is going to last many years, as we just heard about in an earlier discussion, and also, of course, the overall price of doing that. What does it mean if you put that in, and how can we really, in some sense, derive value by making that investment of putting a modem in when consumers can connect using their phones for most applications.
So another question I just got from Twitter. So another related question I had as well. So basically, does putting apps on the car, or too many things to do in a car, make it unsafe or distracting for the driver? I think you kind of addressed that before, but something on a related note as well. So you're always putting the driver at the forefront of all this we've been doing, right? With the apps and everything. What about the passenger in the rear seat? he's still safe enough to interact with a touchscreen or a really interactive device, not the dot matrix style. He would be willing to even have like an iPad at the back of like a device. He's really rich, and the interaction levels are much more higher. He can probably doesn't even have to have like, he can probably have zero attention on the road, but still he can like involve himself. So this is something like probably in a Vegas cab, like the backside of a Vegas cab, you have the most probably sophisticated dash for the passenger there. So something like that. So your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd say there's two categories. One is in the general infotainment area. What is very clear is people really want to have full control, and these days with headsets and earbuds, the boss is sitting in the back, whether they're the 3-year-old boss or the 50-year-old boss, pretty much has full control with their hands and really eyes to be able to do what they want to, as if they were sitting in their homes or in their offices. So that's really less of a 70 or less of a 100 kilometer an hour challenge. It's more a 0 kilometer an hour challenge, and these devices are really, whether it's a flat screen tablet or a phone, is really well suited for that. I'd say if you'd asked this question 5 years ago, we were busy building rear seat entertainment systems with headrests that contain displays. But I think we sort of are looking at a rapid transition now, where most people really want to just use their own device that they bring in, hold it in their hands, and do what they want to do. Every once in a while, there's a need to sort of share resources. This could be the well-endowed speaker system, audio system in the vehicle, where you're listening to perhaps the same kind of content. You might be watching a movie in the back, and then everyone in the car might be listening to the music from that movie, perhaps. And there's a reason to use audio systems to amplify the content you might be listening to. So there's some, I say, special instances of that. But for the most part, rear seat information and entertainment is now very personalized. You could be looking at the sort of owner-boss sitting in the back example, where you're being chauffeur-driven, and you want to conduct a teleconference. That might make sense to have this big screen there in front of you. So there might be specific instances, but those tend to be niche ones, and we can certainly have sort of specific market-specific applications, but they wouldn't be the high-volume types of efforts that we would take on. There's another category where it might be very relevant, and this is where you have a child in the back that's getting hypoglycemic, and this could be a child with diabetes. And there, it's good to know through these medical devices that are now available that in fact that the child is getting hypoglycemic, and the mother or father driving needs to be alerted to that sort of very urgent care that's needed. Sometimes something like getting a piece of banana, enough carbohydrate, can alleviate the situation. So those kinds of applications where the rear seat sort of connectivity helps in conjunction with the health and wellness kind of application, where the caregiving adult, either for the young child in the back or an older person who's being cared for by the adult driver, could be really very useful application. So those are certainly under investigation.
Okay. So on a related note, so ride sharing is getting like fairly popular. Like services like Uber, Lyft, and all the taxi cabs of the world are moving to the app model in terms of reservations to manage efficiency and as well as inventory as well. So in such a situation, like I was on recently I was on a Southwest flight, and like they didn't have any in-flight. My iPad turned out to be the in-flight entertainment console, so they just had a IP address which they were routing the entire user experience. So you could watch and stream and like see the flight progress. So one that'd be really cool in a car, like sitting on a back of a ride-shared cab service or a car, you're being driven around, and you would like to see the progress, the fare, but you don't want to be hooking into your device, but rather don't want to even use the app, but rather, so would you look at, like, are you looking at something like that, like basically exposing an API of some sort of the data parameters coming out of the car over to just the person in the, like, forget connectivity to another car or over the internet, but something which is really close range within the car itself, but to a passenger probably sitting in the back seat who wants to say probably know if the driver is speeding, or if he's taken the right route, or he's avoiding traffic, or taking the proper lanes, or probably is driving in the correct path. So such kind of things. So is that an area also which is in your interest?
Yeah, I think in general, enhancing the safety, the security, and the overall conveniences associated with ride sharing, car sharing, are very much part of our interest as we try to address this future urban commute challenge. And so today you can see examples of this in terms of just what taxi cabs are doing. You can get this flat screen in the back where you basically don't have to have much of a conversation with the driver, but you know you're going from A to B, you haven't deviated, and then you can complete the whole payment system at the back as long as you accept, the journey taken and accept the tariff that's being calculated there. So that's sort of a beginning of some of these, where you sort of have the ability to have a guarded vignette into what's going on with the driver without necessarily having to engage in a conversation with the driver. And so there also you get some very interesting, I'd say, modal, or I should say, sort of complementary types of learning, where the driver gets to know who you are through an indirect service that says this person you picked up is a 4-star passenger or a 5-star passenger on a scale of 1 to 5, and then you get to know the driver. Rating, obviously you hope that it's not a 1 or a 0-star rating, but really someone who's a 4 or 5-star driver. And you're beginning to see some of this in what Uber is doing, where everyone rates everyone. And so there's all kinds of interesting byproducts that come out of this kind of a trust. For example, in a case like Uber, it's one of the things you are concerned about when you are riding a public taxi or a taxi that you normally pick up in the open is there's no connection directly between you and the driver. So if you forget something, an asset, you don't know how to get it back, and you have to search your way through. With Uber, you have and other such car sharing mechanisms, you have a better sense of trust that's just emerging. These are all just new spaces, and so if you forget something, it's almost like you've forgotten something in your own car, or a car that whose driver you're familiar with, so you can always reach them and get the asset back.
So one of the questions around the sync is that sync is still dependent on external connectivity, taking off from where Varun said, which is the entertainment bit. But this is something that's been, a bit of a botheration, because whatever said and done, cellular network dependence is still, not getting resolved. And my phone working, my phone's battery being charged, and my phone's connectivity being operational raises a number of points that the car has to depend on. The ACMA in India had done a huge agreement with telcos for the GPS location in case of car theft. Why not start building connectivity in the car for the sensors or the basic commute? Over the 10-year life period of the car, that connectivity is not going to cost a bomb, right?
Yeah, I think this has been debated about for many years, and really it's a question of how you manage with the change in technologies over a period of 10 years. Wireless carriers have a certain lifetime associated with the standard. We've gone through the 0G, 1G, 2G, 3G, now XG, X could be 4 or 5. Just a matter of, say, the 10-year period. Right? So I think it's a question of really being able to deal with the price of obfuscation and being able to make sure that the technology is constantly serving the consumer.
But for sensor data, we're only looking at, for sensor metrics and sensor data or feedback, we're only looking at very small packet data. I'm not talking about streams to the cars or anything, right? All I'm talking about is packet data, GPRS. Why not start building that into the car? Especially in a geography like India, with the new Fiesta, it is depending on 4 things. It is depending on my phone connected to the car. It's depending on my 3G services to be working. It's depending on my privacy settings to enable location access. and it's depending on my intelligence to use the same phone again and again. We change phones here very fast. We call ourselves a poor economy, but we change our phones every month. So, why not start building that 99 rupees a year or 99 rupees a month kind of a thing into the car itself, or very basic data of location, cars being in an accident? Why is that not being resolved here?
No, I think there's various considerations in terms of what the best way to integrate solutions might be. At the end of the day, it's really looking at what the value proposition is. The moment you put in some capability, in our mind, you almost always will find a demand for greater scope. And whether we call it scope creep when we design the product, or whether we call it consumer demand or market demand after we build the product, there's a certain amount of sort of headroom we have to plan for that. And as you do that, if the cost economics are right, there's no question that we would put that in. All I can say is at this point, obviously what we have in our market doesn't include that, and that's based on certain assumptions we've made with respect to, again, the value to the customer. Looks like I have a tweet here. I'm going to read it out here. Maybe we say, where is Ford placed, or what's their view on driverless cars? So one thing is, this is about driverless cars. I think it's very clear to us that just like you wouldn't embark on a journey across the Indian Ocean or across the Atlantic, if you will, on an aircraft that had no pilot, I don't think it's in our sort of radar screen to look at a car without a driver being sort of on a solution path in certainly near and midterm future, and even looking beyond. It's certainly really attractive to look at where automation can play a role in increasing driver assistance, and maybe even offering sort of a longer term solution beyond just the assistance phase. But driverless cars is sort of a really interesting aspirational goal to have in mind, not something that we think would be on our path in the sort of near and midterm future. We like to look at this in terms of automation and how automation can help augment the driving capability. We call that driver assistance in the broad sense. So that's where we are. They're really focused on that.
Sure. So taking on from there, okay, driverless cars is, I agree, it's a longer debate, and it's, when will we see it in the future? We've been talking about it since the 70s on autonomous cars moving around the city, but sadly, social media has made it popular, and kids think that it's a matter of only the last 2 years that we've been talking about driverless cars. But from pure technology perspective, case in example, Ford India was one of the first guys to have a DTE on their dashboard, a distance to empty. But Ford India does not have anti-collision warnings, does not have driver awareness warnings. Very basic tech which is available with Ford globally is still being taken out of India, right? And here we're talking about mHealth, for example. I know all this is cost, and I know the justification is that we're a very cost-sensitive market, but very basic tech in terms of, is the driver attentive? Has the driver been driving for over 600 kilometers? Should he get a coffee warning? Is he losing the lane again and again? It's nice to see that there is now feedback on how you're driving, but that's hidden in so many menus that I don't think half the people will figure out how you're driving, right? Till they go to the service center and the service center tells them, you know what, you've been getting low average because you've been driving like a crazy idiot. But why are basic stuff being taken out of cars in India? And we talk about a larger vision.
Yeah, no, so I think you sort of touched upon cost, but I think at the end of the day, it's really about value, because you can afford cost if the value of the return is seen to be high enough. And so I think where we are is looking at making sure that we can deliver products that have this broad reach, as I said, making sure that the affordable is desirable not just for a few, but for a much larger base. As you do that, you sort of look at how to position the coming together of technologies and features that allow for that value proposition to be met. So it's really, that's where it is. It's really cost, but in the context of what that cost is going to result in. And so sometimes what happens is, in a certain market, we have to sort of look at how to package those capabilities that we might have on a more global basis to a marketplace to ensure that that value proposition is right for the marketplace. And again, I think we do this based on what we know of the past, and oftentimes that's not really indicative enough of where the future is heading. And so we have to be nimble enough to be able to make those changes and make those adaptations. Clearly, there's a lot of work ahead for us, as you point out and allude to. But I think it's really getting the basics right of being able to commonize our underpinnings and yet be able to be responsive to local market needs. So the need for sort of local innovation, if you will, on a global platform. Clearly, that's our commitment. But as you pointed out, sometimes it might appear like you have less capability today out here when we have a greater capability elsewhere on the more global offering. I think that's where you're coming from. And again, it's a question of how you translate that value proposition where it's really relevant and affordable in a broader sense here.
Okay. One of the things, Prasad, this is off topic from today's conversation, but something that I was following closely back in 2011, 2012. Did the inflatable seatbelts on the rear passenger side really make it to market? And is there stuff that you want to share from there? Your lab was talking about it in 2011, 2012 as the next step in protection for the passenger.
Well, it really made it to market because I had a car last year, which was a car that I ordered off the lot, and it had the inflatable seatbelts on the back. It just is one of those things that hasn't had a complete market penetration like any new technology coming in. You introduce it, and then you adjust based on where you think it'll be most applicable. But certainly it's in there and it's alive and kicking and going strong.
And because that also comes on the One Ford platform. Is that something that's in the connectivity protocol stack available today in terms of sensing? Maybe the car is not fitted with it, but are the sensors or the triggers available in the stack today for measurement?
Not. Again, I think the way we configure and the way we express what we configure varies, but certainly the car is aware of what is being triggered by way of safety signals, and how we combine those safety critical signals into non-safety critical channels like sync is something that has to be weighed very carefully, right? So we wouldn't want to set wrong expectations. As you said, sync connects to phones. If the phone now is not a reliable component in this ecosystem just because of the way it's designed, for sort of non-critical communications, if you put that in the path of a critical airbag-like deployment, you might set false expectations that there'll be.
No, sure, I understand. So my question was: is the data available today? Maybe not a trigger in terms of having something fire on an action point, but is the data available in the stack today, whether it's fitted on the car or not?
Not in the public. It's not a publicly accessible element, but certainly. The car networks are aware of that. That's how we build our applications internally.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. My question is your end, so.
Okay.
So one question. So generally, what's your broad view about what's the next biggest thing in cars and technology in general? And driverless, I think you said it's like probably not the immediate future, but before driverless, what next do you think we would see like hitting the market really soon, like a technology which adds value to our lives?
I think we're really focused on a couple of things, providing enhanced amounts of driverless systems on the one hand. On the other hand, looking at how we could design cars to be more shareable, inherently even models that allow for joint ownership of cars, very different from what we know experience today. Just sort of looking at this again, set out a little bit out into the future. In terms of the very near future, that's product kind of decision. Speak about that, but just increase the amount of driverless systems, increase the amount of conflict. Certainly, being able to address all the regulatory needs and go beyond them. It starts out with fuel economy and those kinds of considerations, and ties into safety and all the ratings associated with it. That's all the ongoing sort of very much current kinds of process.
Gagan, Varun, any last questions?
No, for me, I think I'm done.
Yeah.
It can never, right?
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Varun.
I'm done as well.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, all.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.